with the essential pieces that it needs. To construct your understanding of Islam in a faulty way, it leaves it as a building with some, let's say, very critical what's the expression they use in like construction, like breaches of code. You know, you've broken building code, there's violations there. You'll either get written up by the city, or if you don't get written up by the city, the actual building will fall down. So what we aim to do, inshallah, today is to speak about certain principles that are essential in us understanding Islam properly. And if we kind of miss out on some of these principles, then there's some kind of flaw, or there's some kind of opening that we've left in constructing this building properly. The first of the principles that we need to mention is the primacy of the Quran and Sunnah in understanding the religion, of course. The primacy of the Quran and Sunnah together. The Quran, of course, is our foundational text. It is what Allah Azza wa Jal describes as the source of guidance. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, "Inna hadha al-Qur'ana yahdi lillati hiya aqwam." Yahdi. This Quran is what guides us to that which is the most upright. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, and we revealed upon you the book as something that clarifies for you all things that you need to know. As we mentioned in the khutbah today, the Quran is the lens through which we view the entirety of the world in front of us. Without these lenses, you cannot perceive the world properly. You cannot put things in their proper place. You cannot conceive of what is just as just, and you cannot conceive of what is unjust as unjust without these things, right? It is that lens that gives us the ability to do that. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says about His book, "Ya ayyuhan nasu qad ja'atkum maw'idhatun min rabbikum wa shifaa'un lima fi as-sudur wa hudan wa rahmatun lil mu'minin." Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, there has come to you from your Lord a reminder, a maw'idah, an admonishment. وَشِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, and a cure for that which is in the chest. وَهُدًى, and guidance. وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and a source of mercy for the believers. Now, the Quran, brothers and sisters, it was within Allah's ability to have the Quran be revealed on top of a mountain and have this book be found, and then simply every single person tries to understand the book of their own accord. Was that within Allah's ability to do? Yes or no? He could have revealed the book on a mountain, and then some random person just comes across it, finds it, posts it on social media, puts it in a museum, whatever it may be, and the world can feast upon its meanings and try to make of it what it wills. That being said, if it was in Allah's ability to do that, but He chose not to do that, that means it was a deliberate decision of Allah that He chose to reveal the Quran in the way that He did. And that He chose to reveal the Quran to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Because the purpose of the Quran being preserved in its words, in its literal speech, Inna nahnu nazzalna alayka al-kitab, or Allah Azza wa Jal, He says that He sent down al-dhikr, wa inna lahu lahafidhun. He sent down the message, and He promises that He will preserve it. Would there have been any purpose, would there have been any benefit to the preservation of the words of the Quran without preservation of the meanings of the words of the Quran? We would have had beautiful words that we recite, but without a proper understanding of the meanings of the Quran, there would have been no actual benefit to the words themselves. The Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is therefore all of the commentary and all of the context and all of the meanings provided to us to properly understand the words that are revealed to us. And the Prophet ﷺ is the explainer of the Quran. He is the mufassir of the Quran. He is the first resource we go to understand the Quran properly. And one of the main sources of misguidance that people occur in is when they separate between these two things. Between the guidance, between the wahi that came in the form of the book, and between the guidance and the wahi that came to the Prophet ﷺ. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. The Prophet ﷺ does not speak of his own accord. He does not speak from his own desire. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. It is only a revelation revealed upon the Prophet ﷺ. And you find examples from the companions in which they were able to discern that which comes from the Prophet ﷺ in terms of religious guidance, this is divine. It is divinely sourced. And things that occur outside of that may be from the own ijtihad of the Prophet ﷺ, maybe from the Prophet's own attempt to arrive to something. So there's a famous example of the Prophet ﷺ where they were trying to position themselves for a battle. And one of the companions, he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and this really shows the fiqh of this companion, the deep understanding that this companion had. He says to him, is the decision for us to settle in this location at this time, is this wahi from Allah? Is this revelation from Allah? Or is this your own attempt to find a good place for us to settle in? The Prophet ﷺ, he said it was from his own attempt. He said, if that is the case, then O Messenger of Allah, I think there's a better place in which we can settle in. So it shows they understood that distinction. If something is a religious matter, they understood this is from the Prophet ﷺ, and this is ultimately from Allah, a revelation from Allah. Whereas things that were outside of that religious sphere may have been from the Prophet ﷺ's own understanding. Aisha radiallahu anha, the way she describes the entirety of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, she says that the Prophet ﷺ was a walking Quran. He was a walking Quran. That is to say that every single movement of the Prophet ﷺ, every single thing that the Prophet ﷺ did was a manifestation of the teachings of the Quran. Therefore, to understand Islam properly, while divorcing the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ from the original text is a grave, grave misguidance. It is a grave misguidance. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, he mentions that as-sunnatu safinatu Nuh. As-sunnatu safinatu Nuh. Man rakibaha naja, wa man takhallafa anha ghariq. Imam Malik rahimahullah, he says that the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is like the ark of Nuh ﷺ, the ark of Noah. Whoever does not climb upon this ark will find themselves having drowned. The means through which we understand Islam properly, the means through which we understand the ayat of the Prophet, the ayat of the Quran, is by turning to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is number one. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever it is that the Prophet ﷺ gives you, by command of the Quran itself, whatever the Prophet gives you, take it. And whatever he forbids you from, then abstain from it. This command comes from Allah to obey the Prophet. It comes from Allah to obey the Prophet. Furthermore, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالزُّبُرِ بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالزُّبُرِ وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. This ayah is actually very important. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ. He says that we have revealed to you the message, the reminder. We reveal to you the reminder to make clear to them what has been revealed to them. So there's a reminder that is an explanation of that which has been revealed from Allah. وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرِ. Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed the dhikr, the message, the reminder, so that you may clarify that which has been revealed as well. So Allah Azza wa Jal is speaking of two kinds of revelation here. That revelation which comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and through which he explains the rest of the Quran. Through which he explains the rest of the Quran. And it's interesting for us to point out here that Allah Azza wa Jal, in referring to the message, He doesn't just say the Quran. When He says that He has promised to preserve this message, He doesn't just say He has promised to preserve the book or promised to preserve the Quran. But rather He says that He has sent down a dhikr, which refers to the message in its totality. So that is the wording and the explanation of the Prophet ﷺ, everything that is necessary to understand the deen in its totality, Allah Azza wa Jal has promised to preserve it. Allah Azza wa Jal, He also says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ There has been for you in the messenger of God a beautiful example for you to follow. So could it then be the case that Allah Azza wa Jal points to this person as a beautiful example, commands you to follow everything that He has given you, forbids you from disobeying Him, and then make it the case where the Sunnah has no authority? Wallahi, it's incredibly far-fetched. It is the definition of a misguidance. So one of the main ways in which people deviate nowadays is they separate the Sunnah from the Book of Allah. And when you do that, it makes it a little easier to capitalize on sections of ambiguity in the Quran. Because there might be something that might have some level of ambiguity, but if you go to the Quran and the Sunnah, you'll find there's absolutely no ambiguity whatsoever. Right? So that's number one. Number two, from the principles that we use, inshallah, in understanding Islam properly. Many times we come across something of the religion that we may not understand. When this happens, we must apply this principle or understand this concept. That if something from the religion reaches us that we do not understand, it is either that there's a problem with our understanding, right? We think we might have proper understanding, but we don't. So either there is a problem with our understanding, or what you are looking at is not an authentic text of the religion. These are the two options. You have something in front of you that you do not understand. Either you have misunderstood it, or it is not an authentic text from our religion. So the expression is al-aqlu sahih. Al-aqlu sahih la yata'arad ma'a an-naql sahih. That the sound mind will never contradict the authentic text. So either there's a problem with what you perceive to be the sound mind, there's a problem with your understanding, or the text that you are looking at is not authentically attributable to the Prophet ﷺ. So there are ahadith, for example, of this nature. You may be trying to understand them, you can't make sense of them, and then you look at the hadith and then you see, actually the ulama have said, this hadith is weak. This hadith is not authentically attributable to the Prophet ﷺ. In which case you don't have to justify it. If it can't be authentically attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, you don't even need to exert yourself in trying to justify the meaning of that hadith. One of the examples that comes to mind is the Prophet ﷺ, once he pointed to a young boy, and he was speaking to his group of companions. And he says, لن يدرك هذا الهرم لن يدرك هذا الهرم حتى تأتيكم ساعتكم. He says that he's talking to his companions, and he points to a young boy. And he says, this old boy will not reach old age, except that your hour will have come. So there are some people, they understood this hadith, the way they projected meaning on this hadith was that how could it be that Yawm al-Qiyamah is not already established? Because of course that little boy that was pointed to must have reached old age and by now have passed away. So how could it be the case that this hour has not been established? But this actually, it shows a misunderstanding. Because when the Prophet ﷺ is speaking about if this boy reaches old age, if this young boy reaches old age, this boy is younger than the group of companions he's speaking to. That means this group of companions will definitely die by the time this young boy reaches old age. Right? The group of companions will definitely die by the time this old boy reaches age and reaches old age. And he says, this one will not reach old age except that your hour will have come. And that is why the ulama, they explain this hadith to mean that man mata faqad qamat qiyamatuhu. Man mata faqad qamat qiyamatuhu. Whomsoever passes away, then it is as though their hour has been established. Whether you reach the final day or not, the same effect now takes place. You now are answerable in front of Allah. The hour has been established for you. So this is precisely what the Prophet ﷺ was referring to, that you will have died and you will have reached your hour by the time this boy reaches old age, because you're older than him, right? You guys follow the example? So if someone was to take this hadith at face value and think to themselves, oh, I obviously understand the plain meaning of the hadith. It is an authentic text, so that's not the issue there. Then the problem must be with how we have understood the text. And so oftentimes this happens. Or there's another example where the Prophet ﷺ mentions that the sun seeks permission before rising every day. The sun seeks permission before rising every day. So some people, they're looking at the movement of these heavenly bodies and such, and they say, how could that be the case? Allah Azza wa Jal, He says specifically about the heavens and the earth. He says, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ. That you do not understand the praise, you do not understand the way in which these heavenly bodies, they praise Allah. So Allah Azza wa Jal actually makes reference to the fact that He has made this something that is beyond your capacity to understand. So to project an understanding here would be a mistake, right? So that's a second principle, that we must look to either the authenticity of the text in front of us, or we must be willing to reevaluate our understanding of the text. Many times we may have a misunderstanding of the text because we are conditioned with modern day sensibilities. What does that mean? The society that we're in, it necessarily impacts our understanding of things around us. It impacts what we think about personal freedom should be. It impacts what we think about normal relationships should be. You think that the people who understood Islam before 2000 in Saudi Arabia, just as an example, will understand it in the same way after Nicki Minaj has been invited to Bilad al-Haramain? Do you think that kind of society produces people that understand the religion in the same way? Of course not. So the societies that we are in, they temper our understanding of religious texts. Therefore, when you find some uneasiness in approaching a text, when you see some ayah that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, that uncomfortableness might be normal for the context that you're in, but the least that you can do is understand that this feeling that I have is purely a product of the society that I've grown up in. So it's important for us to make that kind of distinction, that there might be some uneasiness I feel when I come across a certain hadith or a certain ayah or whatever it may be. But for me to understand that my reaction to this is a byproduct of my society. I have been conditioned with certain social and cultural sensibilities that make it difficult for me to understand what Islam might say about relationships, what Islam might say about personal freedoms, what Islam might say about inheritance, what Islam might say about gender roles. If a person works to break down these sensibilities, they may be able to. But that cultural conditioning is very deep. It's very deep. That's why I had one teacher, subhanAllah, I think he gave an incredible example. It says, when it comes to speaking to children, you can view them as though they're like an empty vessel, an empty container. What is your job to do with an empty container? To fill it properly. To fill it properly. You pour in it the purest things that you can pour inside of it. But when you speak to people that are grown, that have been through a lot, you're dealing with a full vessel actually. You're dealing with a full vessel. And what's in this full vessel might be some pure things, but they've been corrupted by other things. These kind of cultural sensibilities that we've been conditioned into, and other things. Your job, therefore, before you can properly pour correct understandings into this vessel, you must pour out that which is incorrect. You must deconstruct before you construct. We must deconstruct some of the ways in which we perceive core concepts, like the examples I mentioned before, what it means to have personal freedoms, personal liberties, and so on. What harm means. This is one of the examples I've given a lot. Harm is one of the words that's used very often. But our conception of harm within an Islamic framework is drastically different than it would be from someone who comes from a different paradigm. Right? Because we believe there is that which harms the body, and there is that which harms the soul. Allah Azza wa Jal has made certain things harmful to the body and certain things harmful to the soul. That which Allah Azza wa Jal has deemed a sin, that which Allah Azza wa Jal has deemed ma'siyah, disobedience to Him, is harmful to the soul without exception. Whether you perceive of it in your body or not is not something that's regarded, right? But these are certain core concepts that we have, right? So we can deconstruct, for example, the meaning of harm before we construct a proper conception of it based upon an Islamic worldview. Number 4, or rather number 3. If you lose count, I probably lost count before you. The understanding of the companions forms a precedent through which we understand the religion. The understanding of the companions, the understanding of the Salaf, of the early generations, it forms a precedent. It's an asl that we go back to understanding the religion properly. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, if other people believe in exactly that which you have believed, if they believe in it as you have believed in it, those people will have been rightly guided. This is a stamp of approval from the one above the 7 heavens. Allah Azza wa Jal says that if they believe in that which you have believed, with the understanding that you have, then they will have been rightly guided. Additionally, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ قَرْنِي خَيْرُ النَّاسِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. That the best of generations, or the best of people, he says, is my generation. Then it is those that follow, then it is those that follow. So this 3 generations of people, they form a precedent. They form a precedent through which we understand the rest of the religion. This is a little bit counterintuitive for us to understand with our Western minds. How so? How so? Because in our modern day, the way that we think about knowledge is that it is constantly improving the more that technology improves. So we always have this implicit assumption that the knowledge of tomorrow is better than the knowledge of today, and is better of the knowledge of yesterday. Is that not the case? The more that technology improves, the more we assume that our knowledge and our conception of things improves. Whereas in our model, actually, we can accept that with regards to things that are not religious in nature. But with that which involves the religion, that which is closer to the Prophet ﷺ, that which is closer to the time of the companions ﷺ, forms a more robust understanding of the religion. It forms a more foundational understanding of how we ought to understand the religion. Is that clear? Good. Okay, next is that it's important for us to understand certain things, that the role of the Prophet ﷺ was not to convey the entirety of the religion to one person at one time, all at once. I'm going to say that again. The role or responsibility of the Prophet ﷺ was not to convey the entirety of the religion to one person at one time. The Prophet ﷺ, he fulfilled the responsibility that he had in conveying the religion through the entirety of his lifetime, through what he taught Abu Bakr, through what he taught Umar, through what he taught Hanbala, through what he taught Abu Huraira. He fulfilled that responsibility through teaching the companions as a whole. That means that during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, you are confused. Who do you go to? Who do you go to during the lifetime of the Prophet if you're confused? Not all at once. To the Prophet ﷺ, he's right there. He's right there. You go to him. What happens when the Prophet ﷺ passes away? This is the first time that like real disagreement comes about, right? So the ulama that came after, especially the people who formed the madahib, the four schools of jurisprudence, Imam Malik, Ahmed, Al-Shafi'i, and Abu Hanifa. Not in that order. Abu Hanifa was the first one. Their role was to synthesize all of the little conversations that the Prophet ﷺ had. It was to understand this is a general text and this is a more specific text. What is the relationship between the specific and the general? In which cases do we apply the general? In which cases do we apply the specific? In which case does one ruling nullify a previous ruling? All of these kinds of things, they synthesize this together, right? So much of the disagreement that the ulama had was they had different conceptions in how these little relationships work together, right? And how these different texts work together. But the ulama that came after them, they built upon the approaches of these founding ulama, right? So in the school of Abu Hanifa, for example, his students, they continued on his legacy. He envisioned certain principles and they built upon those principles. Al-Shafi'i envisioned different principles or usul, and his students built upon those principles, and so on. But it's important for us to understand that we combine the entirety of the sources that we have in front of us to be able to understand the text properly. And we must follow proper approach to arrive to a valid outcome. Because if you don't follow a proper approach, then maybe you become a whirling dervish or something like that, and it's not accepted from you. Allah Azza wa Jalla guide our young boy here, mashallah, tabarakallah. I'll say that again. We're emphasizing two different things here. There's appropriate process, and there's actually arriving to the correct outcome. Those who engage in appropriate process, they follow the book of Allah, they follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, they stick within the principles of the Arabic language, they look to the precedent of the companions, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. They follow proper process. If they follow proper process, then the conclusion that they arrive to will be valid, even if it is incorrect. Even if it is incorrect. So let me give you an example. The Prophet ﷺ, he speaks to the companions and he tells them, do not pray Asr before reaching Banu Qurayza. Do not pray Asr before reaching Banu Qurayza. He's speaking to a group of the companions, saying, you are going to Banu Qurayza. Don't pray Asr until you reach them. Don't pray Asr until you reach them. Then they leave the Prophet ﷺ, and guess what happens? Asr time is about to leave. And you have two groups of the companions form into two different groups. One group says, hey, let's pray Asr. And the other group says, the Prophet said, do not pray Asr until reaching Banu Qurayza. The first group that said, let's pray Asr, they said, Allah Azza wa Jal has said, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'min, Inna salata kanat kitaban mawquta. Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta. Indeed, the salah has been upon the believers a timed prescription. The salah has a time. The salah has a time. So, based upon the text, they're relying upon the text. They arrived to a certain ruling. The other group of companions, they also relied upon a text. Both of them are relying upon wahi, revelation. One comes from the Prophet, one comes directly from Allah. What they were debating actually, the others that were relying upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, they didn't say Quran trumps the hadith. That's actually not what they said. They said what the Prophet ﷺ meant for us to do was to rush. He said, do not pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza, meaning rush. Get there quickly so that you're still within Asr time. So they arrived to different conclusions while they both were relying upon the text. Now, what's important to understand is it possible that the Prophet ﷺ would have intended one thing and its opposite at the same time? No. You can't intend pray there and don't pray there at the same time. That's an impossibility. So from that we established that one of the two groups was wrong. Right? One of the two groups, they misunderstood. They come to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ, he does not criticize either of the two groups. He does not criticize either of the two groups. Because they both had valid process. They both had valid process. If you engage in valid process, then whatever the outcome, it will be accepted by Allah. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِذَا اجْتَهِدَ الْحَاكِمْ or إِذَا حَكَمَ الْحَاكِمْ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. If a person is trying to arrive to a ruling, and he actually arrives to that which Allah intended, then that person will have two rewards. But if a person engages in that process, but doesn't arrive to that which Allah actually intended, the Prophet ﷺ says that person will still have one reward. For following proper process. This is very, very important for us to understand. Because modern day people now, process for them looks like this. It's 2024. How can we still do this? That's not proper process. That's hawa. That's just following your desire, right? So this is an important principle for us to understand. Okay, moving on. That the rulings of the Sharia are built upon a foundation of maqasid, of purposes. Underlying the entirety of the Sharia is the preservation of certain things, the preservation of deen, the preservation of life, the preservation of wealth, of honor, of dignity, of family. There are five main things that the ulama identify as the overwhelming maqasid of the Sharia. The religion must be viewed in light of these maqasid, in light of these higher objectives of the Sharia. That when something comes as a ruling, it falls under one of these five. That it is either there to protect life, or to protect religion, or to protect dignity, or to protect wealth, or to protect the family, and so on. So this allows us to kind of properly put everything in its due place. This field in particular is often abused. Can be very easy to say, well, one of the objectives of the Sharia is the preservation of life or the preservation of wealth. So then you do some weird gymnastics about saying how, well, we can preserve our wealth better if we invest it into some dubious sources and so on. You say, because this is one of the maqasid of the Sharia. So it's actually a field that's very often abused. One of the main people who's written on the subject of Maqasid al-Sharia, his name was Imam al-Shatibi. Imam al-Shatibi in his book Al-Muwafaqat. Al-Muwafaqat. In the beginning of his book, in the introduction of his book, he says, لا يحل النظر في كتاب هذا نظر مفيد أو مستفيد إلا لمن كان ريانا بعلوم الشريعة. He says it is not permissible for a person to even look at this book of mine, this talk about objectives of the Sharia, except that they be someone who is full, literally like has had their full of the sciences of the Sharia, of the different disciplines of the Sharia. Because this field in particular is rife with people who abuse it. They look at the objectives of the Sharia and then they try to make that which is impermissible permissible, and vice versa. Okay, I actually have a couple more, but inshallah we'll end on this. From the principles of understanding Islam properly is to understand the comprehensiveness of that which Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed. That religion for us is not something that is confined to one sphere of our lives. Religion is not just that which is a personal matter. That which is in the political sphere or that which is in the societal sphere is one thing, and then religion becomes another thing of its own. This is not our conception of reality. This is not our conception of religion. If there is anything that has come in this religion that deals with politics, then suddenly that is an authority in the field of politics. Anything that has to do with marital relationships, then that text is an authority in marital relationships. Anything that comes in inheritance, that thing is an authority in whatever it may be. If there is something revealed to us in a particular field from Allah or through His Messenger, then that thing is an authority for us. In our religion, we do not have separation of church and state or separation of mosque and state. In fact, the state itself derives its authority from the religion. If it goes against the religion, then that state loses its authority. Right? So that's very important for us to understand. That Islam deals with us from A to Z. Every single aspect of our lives. Allah Azza wa Jal has given us guidance to deal with all of those matters. So these are some of the things, inshallah, I think that are very important for us to understand. Other things, just very briefly, as like headlines that I wanted to speak about, was the importance of having balance and moderation in all things. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Allah Azza wa Jal has made us a balanced nation. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ. Those who go to extremes will have been destroyed. وَلَنْ دِينُ اللَّهِ مَتِينٌ وَلَنْ يُشَادَّ هَذَا الدِّينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَ. That the religion of Allah is strong, and no one will try to make this religion more intense than it already is, except that the religion will overpower him. So the importance of having balance, the importance of being just in all of our affairs. These are overarching principles of the Sharia. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. Indeed, Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded that you render unto people the things that they deserve. You render unto them the trust that belongs to them. وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. And that if you rule between people, that you do so with justice. And the last thing I'll mention from overarching principles of the Sharia, and we'll wrap it up inshallah, is the importance of the hereafter taking precedence over this worldly life. There are many things that we will not properly understand about the world unless we have a belief in the hereafter. When you see suffering going on, when you see people that go through great sacrifices for this religion, the only thing that makes it make sense is when you understand that Allah Azza wa Jal will bring these people back, will establish the hour, and will reward people and compensate them accordingly. You will not be able to put things in their proper place in looking at the world, in looking at the Sharia, if you do not hold this understanding and always bring to mind the fact that we will be brought back before Allah, and Allah Azza wa Jal will be the final judge of our affairs. So these of course aren't all of the principles for us to understand the deen, but these are some overarching principles for us to have a holistic understanding of the deen. And there wasn't much time for questions, but if there's anything afterwards, then inshallah after the salah, you can approach me and we can have a discussion. جزاكم الله خيرا. هذا والله أعلم. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.